Hey everyone, welcome to back here to Techstrong TV. You know, as I was saying before in the green room before we got on here versus the green wall that I use behind us in the studio, Brian Dawson has been doing videos on Techstrong, I think before there was a Techstrong. It was still just DevOps.com.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to have him back. He's worn a lot of hats over the year. He'll tell you all about it. But let's welcome my friend Brian Dawson to Techstrong, back to Techstrong TV. Brian, it's good to see you. How are you, man?
Alan, good to see you as well. Looking good. It's been a bit, but yeah,
Been
always
a
good to
minute.
see it. Like we go back to the early days of DevOps,
Yeah.
of DevOps.com. Been great to see Techstrong grow to what it is today.
I mean, it's 12 years ago.
Yeah.
Actually, next month will be 12 years. So crazy.
Yeah.
Brian,
I want to be you when I grow up, Alan. I was going to say you've done a great job.
You don't want to be me. You be the best Brian Dawson you can, and that'll be enough for this world, my friend.
Okay, sir.
Brian, give people, I said you've been around and we know each other a long time, but give people a sense of kind of your career arc and kind of things you've done.
Yeah, I would love to share because I think it's somewhat been atypical, but I have a lot of pride in it. So, I frankly started my career deciding I wanted to become a computer programmer so that I can build video games. I was able to be one of the first 100 people at Sony PlayStation or Sony Computer Entertainment of America. And that gave me a great chance to learn about how you enable smart developers and smart teams to deliver technology literally from start to finish. I had the benefit of then moving forward and building out our tools and technology program for Sony Worldwide Studios, which led me to open source and developer tooling. And then from there, most of my career has been focused on kind of that underlying substrate that enables technology delivery, but then also with a particular focus on open source, inner source, reuse, and how do we efficiently sort of capture the power of community to help us deliver software better, faster, and now we'll talk about more secure.
Excellent. Love it. So, as I think people see under your name here on the screen, you're the Director of Product Management for Linux at CIQ. Tell us about CIQ. There might be people out here who are not familiar with them. And then tell us about, what your role is here now with this title.
Okay, great. And actually, I'll segue from before. I saw a fantastic fit or opportunity to come join CIQ because CIQ is not only built on open source, and I'll tell that history in a minute. They are focused on emerging and leading edge technology, starting with an HPC background, and now sort of reframing and revolutionizing Linux. So when I had an opportunity to come here about a year ago, I jumped on. Now to tell you a bit about CIQ, really cool story. So our CEO and founder, Greg Kurtzer, who I know you've had conversations with, is one of the co-founders of CentOS Linux, which for those that don't know, eventually went under Red Hat. And while he was prior to and while he was founding Linux, he was building out performant compute infrastructure for high performance computing for our national labs, the systems that power our cancer research, our simulations, our weapons armory, and really what a lot of people are trying to adopt with AI today. After building that out and delivering some, I think, really impactful open source technologies like Aptainer, Werewolf, he founded CIQ. And CIQ has a focus on delivering modern infrastructure for the generation of AI or the AI generation. And, we believe that both with building widely adopted open source platforms like Linux, as well as being able to scale high performance computing in real production environments, that we're in a situation where we have the skills, knowledge, and experience to build the modern infrastructure that people need for the next age of compute. There's another interesting story as we get to Linux where I think we'll drill in. IBM bought CentOS. CentOS was really kind of the developer's RHEL. It allowed you to learn enterprise Linux. It allowed you to deploy enterprise Linux in your dev and test environments without high cost. Eventually, CentOS was sort of shut down and moved upstream as Linux as sort of its testing bed. So developers lost their dev stage environment, their testing ground, learning ground. I think within a week of that happening, Greg went to the channels and said, hey, let's start a new CentOS. Immediately, people responded. They named it Rocky in ode to one of his co-founders who is no longer with us. And so that's CIQ. And that brings me here with CIQ today. I will add, as to kind of lean in, one of the thesis we have here at CIQ is that while Linux is widely adopted, general purpose Linux takes significant full-time engineer hours, risk, and iteration to tune for purpose workloads like security, like container hosts, like AI. And we believe it's our responsibility and contribution to the industry and the Linux community to sort of build workload-specific variants that close out at least 80% of that gap, so that people just have to finish off the bespoke 20%.
It's funny. 1998, 99, I'm helping build a company, an early ASP called Interliant. We went public in, I think, 2000. And we learned that lesson in the ASP world.
Interesting.
25
ASP
years ago, that
yes.
the ASP world, application service provider. Yep. And in that out of the box, complex applications at best can do 80%.
Right.
You always need to fine tune the 20%.
Yeah.
And here we are 25 years later, hasn't changed,
And
right?
we're talking the same thing. Yeah. I mean, even in
Same
SaaS,
thing.
right? Salesforce.
Yeah, SaaS is the same
right?
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. You think you're just going to log in and you're good to go?
Right.
What do you think all those Salesforce consultants are doing? But all that aside, Brian, Rocky Linux has made a name for itself as a secure, a hardened kernel, if you will, a hardened Linux OS. And in today's world, where the attack surface is multiplying, every day with AI and now all of that it brings. What a good time to have a hardening, a really hardened OS here, and a not only just the OS itself, but the packages, the whole process around it that you can, have something you trust in. You probably saw this week, Claude Opus 4.6 came out.
Yes.
Within a couple of days, it found 600 vulnerabilities in open source code
for decades. Right. Some existed for decades. Yes.
If that's not enough to scare your pants off, what is, right? I mean, it's enough to keep you up at night. And just, I imagine that makes a good, it's a good reason to take a look at Rocky.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and, to tell you a bit about our relationship to Rocky to set the stages. So Rocky is downstream of RHEL. It is free and open source, run by the Rocky Enterprise Software Foundation, or RESF. And what that does is that gives sort of enterprise Linux stability and base security that people can access for free, right? Replaces CentOS. Now, what we found is that still to take that and harden it. And for many people, harden means compliant. It means I configure SE Linux. I run some OpenSCAP playbooks like DISA-STIG or NIST 800-171 acronym soup, right? To kind of harden my system to be compliant and pass audits. All right. So we did realize that people need help with that, because that in itself, yes, is important and takes a lot of time. Right. But as you said, Alan, I think the statistic is most software applications use something like 200 open source components. There are roughly estimates of, in the area of 40 new vulnerabilities being discovered across the whole open source ecosystem every day. And the time to remediate those takes anywhere from 47 days to 100 plus days. In some cases, like for some of our federal entities, you never patch or remediate those, right? So now we enter the discussion of proactive hardening, right? We take Rocky, we give you your compliance checkbox, but your Claude Opus story is a perfect example. There are CVEs that will be CVEs that have not been identified or exposed yet. How do you protect yourself against those? All right.
And that is it right there, right? In a world where, there's a Claude Opus every day,
Right.
or and it's not just the good guys that are going to use it. Thank God it's the good guys that found these 600 vulnerabilities. But the bad guys are using it too.
Yeah. Well,
and maybe better.
Yeah, I hadn't looked at the latest 5.3 codex yet, but I was just reading news that OpenAI is safety commission in California, I believe it is, feels they may be in violation of AI safety laws because they are the first ones to publicly release a model that has a high level risk because it is good enough that it can be easily used by bad actors to exploit systems. Right.
So on that note, I just saw a flash come across my screen earlier that Anthropic announced something about that Claude can be used for heinous crimes or something to that nature, which sounds similar to what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And look, they probably all can, Brian. I mean, but when did people ever stop for security? It's full speed ahead here, and the we're going to have to play catch up as we always do.
Yeah. And I think, you know what, you highlight, and I'm just preparing a couple of sort of things, some numbers I want to cite, but you highlight a key thing about what is sweeping over technology, especially in this AI age, right? Is the technology sector and the technology space at this point is dictated by speed. Who can move the fastest, right? But what we are not necessarily doing and have not figured out is how can we move faster in identifying security threats, protecting ourselves against those so we can stay ahead of the bad guys, right? So how do we balance this fact that we have this wide attack surface? The attack rate is increasing at astounding rates. We're being told we need to ship yesterday. So we don't have the privilege to sit down and button down all of the hatches. Well, what we believe you need to do is you need to practice what we call proactive hardening. We no longer can deploy a system and then sit and wait for alerts to bomb us and tell us that there's a potential risk, go out, evaluate that risk, analyze where it lives across our infrastructure, and then stop everything to go patch it. Right. What we need to be able to do is know that when we install this foundational piece of our infrastructure, that thing that lays beneath our hardware, our compute, and the rest of our workloads, we need some level of assurance or protection that if somebody gets in, they're going to be stopped. And so that's what we're building with Rocky Linux from CIQ Harden. It's could have been I'll honestly say, Al and us having known each other for a while, I think this is going to turn out to be one of my prouder moments of my career, being able to be part of the team that delivered this.
You know what? We're going to come back to this day sometime in the future, hopefully, yes, Brian, and you'll say, hey, I told you I would, and I did.
Right.
So I hope that happens. You know what? We're running a little low on time, but for people who want to get more information about CIQ, maybe even information about Rocky, I realize, it's different, but where can we send people to get smarter, Brian?
Oh, please send them to CIQ.com. Everybody go take a look at our resources and blogs, in particular around some key vulnerabilities and how they're mitigated. If you're interested in rocking Linux from CIQ hardened and ensuring that you are protected against unknown vulnerabilities in 0 days, or you just need to become compliant, reach out, hit the contact us. and let's have a conversation. I do, Alan, before I get the hook, I want to call out as an example here. There's a number of vulnerabilities. One that recently in 2025, I think it hit around April, May of last year, was publicly disclosed as something called BPF door. And many of us in the sector probably heard about the SK Telecom breach. There was a vulnerability that lived in SK Telecom's systems for 5 years undetected. Where that thing lived and stayed resident was in the kernel. And it was able to sort of activate when needed for BPF door, inspect that packet traffic, and take actions. We did some investigations. We did some tests. I have them running on my system now. And this is a case where if 5 years ago, SK Telecom had installed the Linux kernel runtime guard that our own Solar designer builds into Rocky Linux from CIQ hardened, chances are they never would have been affected by BPF door. And just to drive home the importance of that, not only was a bunch of personally identifiable information compromised, estimates for what that cost was for SK Telecom are somewhere between $610 million and close to $900 million just for that single breach alone.
Fair.
So there's value here.
Agreed. Brian, hey, man, it's great to have you back on here. Come back and visit us again soon. Keep us posted, okay?
Okay. Thank you, Alan. It's great to see you again.
Great to see you. Brian Dawson, Director of Product Management Linux at CIQ. Talking about if you're looking for real hardened systems, especially a hard and rocky Linux system, CIQ is a good place to go check it out, CIQ.com. Brian, we'll see you soon. That's it for Techstrong TV. We'll be back with more in a minute.
Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Digital CXO Leadership Insight Series. I'm your host, Mike Fizzara. Today we're with Loong Wang, who's the CEO of QDX Technologies, and we're having a chat about how quantum computing will be applied to chemistry, because, well, it might be one of the killer apps out there for it. Hey, Loong, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
So I think people, at least they're aware of quantum computing. I don't think most people truly understand how it works, but there are a lot of use cases that have historically been intractable for conventional computing, including the infamous Schrodinger's cats and its associated equations, correct? So from your perspective, though, what's exciting here? What are you looking forward to? And what can we do today versus maybe tomorrow?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that quantum computing basically has sort of two ways of thinking about it. There's using these new quantum computers that are getting built to try and do computing in a fundamentally new way. And then there's using conventional computers, classical machines that we've had for decades, to try and predict quantum phenomena. And they're sort of two sides of the same coin, right? I like to frame it as either you use quantum phenomena to try and do computing, or you use computing to try and predict quantum phenomena. I think today we are yet to see large-scale applications of quantum computing, so using these phenomena to do computing. But what we're increasingly seeing that we're capable of doing, and sort of what we're focused on as a company, is how to use conventional computers to do a lot of the things that we thought we would need quantum computers to do, but it turns out we actually don't. And it turns out you can make conventional computers fast enough that you can still solve many of these challenges.
Well, how do you achieve that exactly? Because a lot of folks have at least been convinced that we need, massive data centers to run quantum computers, and we may not see the benefits of these things till the end of the decade. And you seem to be saying we can do a lot with what we already have.
Yeah, I think what it requires is going back to the drawing board a little bit with some of the algorithms that have existed for decades. I think we're approaching the 100th anniversary of Schrödinger publishing his equation. And thinking about how to rewrite them and redesign them for modern computers. A lot of these algorithms would have been written well before the burst of, the GPU industry. And right now that's going, like crazy because of AI. And there's a lot of these massively parallel accelerated pieces of hardware that you can actually take advantage of, and upgrade all of the old algorithms that we used to use. And that's kind of at a very high level how one unlocks a lot of these use cases that, we thought we might need quantum computers for. There's still a whole section of problems that you definitely need quantum computers for, but in chemistry at least, there's a lot of things that start to look like they're tractable either now or in the next couple of years.
A lot of those algorithms, to your point, were written, I don't know, as far back sometimes as the 1950s. Who's going to go in and kind of rewrite those algorithms? Is that something that you guys are doing, or is that something a community of researchers needs to do, or how does it come about?
It's a mix of both. I mean, there's lots of different people trying to do this, but it is one of the things that our company has done. And so the way that we were able to get the kinds of speed ups that we have been able to get was by going back to the drawing board and rebuilding all of this technology essentially from scratch for the modern era.
Are there things that you expect the chemistry sector to be able to do with conventional computers, either in the next few months or years, that people would be amazed by? What's on your to-do list?
One of the things that is particularly exciting for quantum chemistry is the ability to look at reactions. So typically, if we could, we probably would simulate everything quantum mechanically. The only reason that we don't is it's like intractably hard. It requires a huge amount of compute power. But as you start making your computers better, and as you start making algorithms that are far more efficient at leveraging these new computers, you do unlock a lot of these capabilities that maybe even a couple of years ago we would have thought we couldn't achieve. So one of the ones that categorically is really interesting is like chemical reactions. So how do you model chemical reactions? And when you're using quantum techniques to do this, typically we're focused on really small systems, really simple, or simple in terms of like how long it takes and how many atoms we're looking at. What we're starting to be able to do now is look at chemical reactions that involve entire proteins. So you're looking at like enzymes or covalent binders, things that involve tens of thousands of atoms, 20,000 atoms plus, and you can run that whole calculation quantum mechanically. And that's just something that wouldn't have been possible even a couple of years ago.
Will this kind of drive innovations downstream? Because, well, let's take, for example, healthcare. There is a lot of research dependent upon what's going on in the chemistry world. So, is this bigger than just the fact that I can track some interactions for chemicals? It just has implications for all kinds of things downstream.
That's exactly right. I mean, at the end of the day, drugs are just chemicals interacting with proteins in your body. And so if you can super accurately simulate the interactions between those chemicals and various proteins of interest, then you can massively improve the way that we do drug discovery. Not only can you make the existing types of drugs that we're trying to develop easier to develop, cheaper to develop, faster to develop, you can also start thinking about building new types of drugs that traditionally have been sort of avoided because of how complex they are to make and how complex they are to get right. But if you can model the chemistry really well, then suddenly these types of modalities become much less scary. And you also pave the way for just a lot of like maybe basic infrastructure. So one of the challenges that can occur in the space is when you design an interesting drug or an interesting compound that you think might be effective, there's this follow-on question of how do I make this thing? What's the series of chemical reactions that I need to do to bring this design into the world physically? And that's kind of an unsolved problem in computing right now. Give me a compound and I'll tell you exactly what series of reactions you need to do to make it. That's not something that computers can do presently, but it's absolutely something that you can do with quantum chemistry.
How do you perceive AI today and within that context? Because some people sometimes talk about AI and quantum as if they're two completely different things, but I wonder if as we go forward, are we just going to wind up seeing these two things kind of meld together in a way that gives us some greater outcome because one makes the other more accessible?
I mean, that's exactly right. So we're already seeing these two things come together in our company today, where on one hand, you can use artificial intelligence systems to make quantum chemistry more approachable to the average person, right? Right now, you have to be not just a computational chemist, but a very specific type of computational chemist to have a chance of correctly using quantum chemistry technology. But with the advent of LLMs, we're seeing it's increasingly possible to have these AI systems design their own algorithms, or to be more approachable to computational chemists as opposed to specialized quantum computational chemists, or even medicinal chemists instead of computational chemists. And so the more that you can broaden access to the technology, the more that technology is going to proliferate, and the more of those sort of problems that quantum chemistry is useful for will be solved. And then secondly, it's becoming pretty common to use AI systems to do design in like most spaces, whether that's drug design, material sciences, etc. And at the end of the day, the artificial intelligence puts forward the design, and it needs feedback on how good that design is. If you don't have super high accuracy simulations, your only option is to go into the lab, make the thing, test the thing, and give that data back to the AI. And that's a really slow loop because it takes weeks to do that. And you'd like your AI ideally to iterate hundreds, if not thousands of times on its own designs. But if you have simulations that are sufficiently accurate and sufficiently fast, then you don't need to go to the lab straight away. You can do several iterations with the AI, purely on a machine before going into the lab and spot checking your work. And if you want things that are sort of, if you want to be able to do that, you need simulations that are super accurate and super fast. And at the end of the day, the best thing there is quantum chemistry.
Where is the funding for this coming from? Because, we see massive amounts of dollars being poured into AI, and we'll see massive amounts of money lining up to be poured into quantum. But are people looking at quantum chemistry and kind of equating the two, or does it kind of fall between the two sometimes? And everybody else thinks somebody else is going to do something about it.
I think it integrates nicely with the two. There's a lot of complementarity between sort of the typical approach to quantum computing and how you accelerate quantum chemistry methods. And there's a lot of overlap between how you use artificial intelligence to sufficiently advance and accelerate these quantum chemistry methods. But it is sort of like this in-between stage. And I would say it's sort of like an emerging field. There are certainly not, VCs that are specialized in quantum chemistry, whereas there are VCs that are specialized in AI, for example. But I think like the deep tech investors typically have a really broad range of capabilities, and they're typically able to get their heads around this kind of technology and see the value in it.
What would you like to see organizations do to help us get to this goal? Is there something that the federal government should be doing, or is there something that research labs should be doing? What's kind of missing from your perspective?
I think the change in the scale at which you can use quantum chemistry has changed really rapidly over the last even 2 to 3 years. And I think a lot of people haven't caught up with that. And when they think about using quantum chemistry, they still think in a framework of 5 to 10 years ago, where they say, okay, well, we can do quantum chemistry, but it's really restricted. We can only look at systems of, that are very small, over a very small time frame. So even though we get really accurate answers, we can't look at really big systems that are interesting to us. And I think people just need to sort of look around and realize that that's actually not true anymore. And if you wanted to do thousands of quantum chemistry calculations on protein-sized systems, that's something that is actually possible today, cheaply and efficiently. And the kinds of research that you might do, the kinds of experiments that you might run, dramatically change when you sort of reach that sort of like 1,000-fold scale up. Things become sort of quantitatively different and take on an entirely new quality.
Are there things that you're hoping that maybe will solve, or issues that we've been unable to kind of wrap our heads around, whether it's, I don't know, some sort of disease that we can't really understand yet, or some interaction between, I don't know, energy and humanity and the planet? But what things do you think might get solved in the next half a decade or so because we're investing in quantum chemistry?
I'm really interested in two problems. One that I know a lot more about and one that I know a lot less about. The one that I know a lot less about is plasma-facing materials. A lot of really complex quantum chemistry calculations require a very, very high level of theory in order to design the kinds of materials that you can use in modern and emerging fusion reactors. And that, I think, would be, I think the idea of helping advance materials in the direction of new types of energy is just incredibly important for humanity. The other area that I'm really excited by is simulating something called the CYP family of enzymes. So it's this sort of series of enzymes that are in your liver, and they're responsible for metabolizing 80 to 90% of all the drugs that we produce. But because that metabolic process is a really complicated chemical reaction, probably one of the most complex chemical reactions that happens in your body, no one has ever simulated this thing end to end. So there's very little information on how it actually works on any given drug. And it's very common to see toxicity show up in the clinic when you put a compound into humans for the first time. That is a consequence of us not really understanding how the CYP enzyme was going to interact with that drug. And I think in the next year or two, we'll be able to simulate enzymes like that and completely change how med chemists think about toxicity.
So what's that one thing you kind of see us doing today that makes you shake your head a little bit, go and say, folks, maybe we're paying too much attention to that and not enough to this? And, is there something we should be doing at the university level now to kind of change everybody's mindsets?
That's a really good question. I think hitting the same benchmarks over and over again. So what's pretty common in the space is that you have a series of benchmarks that sort of sit there for many years, and people develop algorithms against those benchmarks and try to retrospectively prove that their technique has some predictive power. Something that the AI space is doing really well right now compared to, other areas is they're constantly updating these benchmarks. It feels like every other month, there's some new benchmark that people are trying to produce that better captures the idiosyncrasies of something that's super intelligent. That just doesn't happen in the chemistry space. The rate at which we release new benchmarks to try ourselves against, and the relevancy of those benchmarks to the problems that people actually care about in the world, such as drug discovery or material sciences, there is correlation there, but it's not as good as you would want. And I think a lot more effort goes into trying to beat these benchmarks than goes into trying to build good benchmarks that are worth beating. And I think that's probably something we could afford to pay more attention to at the researcher level.
Folks, you heard it here. We think quantum computing is cool, but maybe quantum chemistry is even cooler still because, well, we're talking about the building blocks of life at the end of the day. Hey, Loong, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks so much, Mike.
All right. And thank you all for watching the latest episode of the Digital CXO Leadership Inside series. You can find this episode and others on our website. We invite you to check all those out. Until then, we'll see you next time.
Hey everyone, it's Alan Shimel, founder, CEO here at Techstrong Group. Really happy to introduce this next session here for you. In this session, we are going to have Futurum's Fernando Montenegro, who is the analyst in the security cyberspace, speaking with Ryan Jones. Ryan is the partner director of product for Power Platform Managed Platform over at Microsoft. Great conversation with Ryan and Fernando. Fernando's going to talk to Ryan as we explore how organizations can securely scale agentic apps, including Power Platform's governance capabilities. This is going to include managed environments, adaptive risk models, and lifecycle controls. Hopefully, you'll get out of this video practical guidance for balancing innovation with compliance in an age of AI-first development. Let's listen in on Fernando and Ryan.
Alan, thank you very much. So, I'm Fernando Montenegro. I am VP of Security Research over at Futurum, and I'm thrilled to be here with Ryan Jones to talk about the broader topic of AI governance. Ryan, want to say a few words before we get started?
Yeah, thanks so much, Fernando. My name is Ryan. I work on a number of the security, governance, and operational capabilities that we provide not only to our AI agents, but also that we provide to our low-code apps and automations that run on the Power Platform as well.
Have you come across something more specific to AI risks or AI governance concerns that surface above and beyond the data sharing, data flow and sharing and others?
As we look at the maturity of agents, we see that they kind of go from being assistants that are completely directed by humans to still interactive agents where humans are dispatching tasks, but, the agent is completing them on behalf of the human. And then we see kind of those fully autonomous agents. And I would say that 10 to 20% is really more over on the end of the spectrum with those fully autonomous agents than it is with, like my little assistant agent or something like that. And the types of things that we see at that end of the spectrum are things like, hey, if I am collaborating with a set of agents, how do I understand what they are doing or what they are doing on my behalf? The second scenario that we see is we're in the very early innings of AI. And so there are lots of cases where agents need help, where they sometimes get stuck. And so some of the things that we've been trying to add into our products and our offerings are things like within Power Apps, we have the agent feed where a human can see what all the agents are doing for them. And then within Copilot Studio, the request information action, which actually allows us to define an agent such that it can engage with humans as needed.
So what has been your exposure, experience? What kind of considerations do you have in this topic of model drift and model security and so on?
Yeah, I think that, it's funny. We've talked about how what's old is new again earlier, right?
Yep.
We've had static tests that we perform against software for a long time. And what's interesting is seeing how that is evolving, because models are less deterministic than traditional software. We call it, stochastic life, right? And so as a part of that, one of the capabilities that we've added to Copilot Studio is the ability to add tests and evaluations so that as our technology improves, as makers and builders go through and they modify what tools their agents can use or what knowledge sources are used to ground those agents, those test cases, those evals can run and can return a result so that folks, as they are evolving, they know whether or not they're actually improving the quality of their agents. Because what we find is that the first day that an agent is shipped in an organization, this may sound negative, but that's going to be the worst that agent ever is, okay? It's only going to get better over time as folks refine the knowledge sources, as folks refine the tools, as folks look at and improve the success rate across those evals over time. And so I think that those quality gates that we've had in software for a long time, we have those with AI as well. Mm-hmm. I think also, a lot of times an individual maker, they're going to be the folks that are really interested in whether or not that agent really works well or not. While, IT is going to take a bigger picture look at things, right? They're going to want to understand in aggregate, how are things looking? Are they healthy or not? And it could be that if they see an agent that's not performing well, but, maybe just you and I use it, IT probably doesn't care. But if I have an agent that 20,000 people use this month, IT is going to care. And so those same views that we provide to our makers to understand whether or not their agents are healthy, we provide those aggregated views for the admins as well. In fact, had a large customer in the energy industry where someone built an agent and it was for them and they shared it and it kind of grew and grew and grew. Next thing they knew, they had 10,000 people using it. They moved on to work on other things, right? IT was able to see and observe, oh my gosh, this agent is critical to our business. And so they took it over. They added it to their portfolio of applications that they managed. And the thing was, they saw it not as a burden, but rather as an opportunity, because there's an application that's out there that delivers value to tens of thousands of people in the business every month. And their dev cost up to that point had been zero. So it was a win-win for everybody.
Once the technology security teams build the guardrails, right, then the business users are free to go work on those use cases. So what kind of advice do you think would be applicable to those technology and security teams in terms of getting them ready to build or to build those guardrails or to leverage what they have to implement those guardrails?
I think enumerating the categories or the dimensions of risk is one of the first steps. There are huge categories of risk that these teams can eliminate through how they define policies. And to be clear, I don't mean policies like a Word document. I mean policies that are codified in the Power Platform and Copilot Studio and these sorts of things. Organizations don't want a random person in their company to build a workflow that takes information from their core ERP system and pushes it to Twitter, right? We have the controls that allow you to preclude that.
What would you consider to be, from a governance angle? You mentioned, okay, let's not focus on use cases. What would be advice for, okay, let's move this forward, right? Where are typical things that you see people, hey, let's do this?
I think the first thing that we see people do is they define like a zoned governance framework or a zoned governance approach, right? They decide within their company or their organization, what does green, what does yellow, what does red look like? And then they go through and they define that using the tools that we provide through the Power Platform and through Copilot Studio. I think the second thing that we see folks do is that helps with kind of the supply side, right? That sees to it that the technology is available and accessible for folks across the organization. But then there's this strong demand element. Because gosh, I was talking to another big company in the credit processing space a couple of weeks ago, and they had this amazing, governance framework set up, but they didn't do anything to stimulate demand, right? And so the next thing that we see is, reaching out to the businesses, not to harvest their use cases, but to help them implement their use cases, things like hackathons, things like training, things where for the people that are interested and excited about transformation through technology, where they can roll up their sleeves and get into it. I mean, the number of apps and agents and automations that came out of those couple-day training session and hackathons, it blows my mind every time I have the opportunity to participate in one of them. And it's fascinating because you see the passion of the people in the business. You see their ideas come to life. And then in many cases, that's the first step of a broader personal transformation and career journey, where you have someone that's been in accounts receivable for the last 2 decades, and all of a sudden they realize, oh my gosh, I can actually harness AI to completely change how this part of the business works.
And what you highlight here is super interesting, because one of the things we talk about in the context of platforms is how you can have that network effect of you've already configured something in your environment for a particular use case, like I said, enter groups for identity, and how that can accelerate the time to value, if you will, within AI development, because hey, you're building on a foundation that you already built for your organization. So I think that's a really powerful message, right? And it's something that I tie back to: how do we help technology and security teams build that scaffolding so that those business users can go play with the on those environments.
1,000%. And I think that in a lot of circumstances, it means standing on the shoulders of giants that came ahead of us, right? Like what organization today doesn't have Entra deployed in one form or another for user and group management? And so why wouldn't we use those grouping constructs as a foundational capability around which we build our security and governance frameworks, right? Like it's already there. It already works. And I think that is one of the things that's a little bit differentiating around the offerings that we provide in the space, because I build an app, an agent, an automation from day zero. It's Entra authenticated and authorized, right? Another thing that we're seeing that's super common right now is as companies are trying to figure out how do they get these AI tools into the hands of people across the organization, and how does that center of excellence or that center of an enablement help people in the various business units upskill and drive transformation. One of the things that we're seeing is that our customers who already had a center of enablement or a center of excellence built out for low-code applications and automations, they're moving much, much faster when it comes to agentic transformation, because a lot of the foundational governance concepts that you need to have in place, they're modality or client agnostic. And so that's, I was talking with a financial services customer just yesterday, a big one of the GSIFIs, and they were like, yeah, we have deployed, this many thousands of agents over the course of the last, month, and we would not have been able to do that if it wasn't for the fact that we already had this governance framework in place from what we've done over the course of the last 5 years with low code.
I think that one of the areas that we want people to be aware of, like, and we talk about in our research, is that this evolution in models, right? We shouldn't be, just like you said about the use cases, just like the use case conversation, you shouldn't be waiting for the use cases before you get started, kind of thing. We shouldn't be waiting for a perfect model to solve, okay, once we have this model, this is how we're going to do this. No, because these models are evolving constantly, right? And if you architect your AI governance framework right, you build in or you leverage the monitoring capabilities to observe how a particular model is evolving, how a particular model is behaving. So yes, it is a critical component, like observing how these things are evolving.
Well, and it's interesting because I know that at times we've had discussions with some customers that are like, hey, how do I control which version of the model is being used by this agent? And, there are some places where we give customer those controls. But I will say, like, I'm kind of hesitant about it because I can't tell you the last time I talked to a customer that was worried about what version of the .NET framework or what version of Python I was using to deliver services to them. And so I think it's a little bit interesting that folks are looking for that level of control with some of these models. And I think that if we zoom out and ask ourselves, apply the good old 5 whys to why folks are looking for that. They want to make sure that as new models are available, it doesn't cause functional regressions in their agents. And the thing is, like we were talking about earlier, that's quite literally why we have tests and evals, right? And that's where, by the way, if for some reason, even though I don't think I've seen it practically speaking in the last year or so, if folks did see a regression as a result of a new model, awesome. At that point, yes, you want the control to go back to an older version, but we're not really seeing that in practice that much. So,
yeah, no, and it's this speaks this talk track of multiple tools for your SaaS apps within the business environments is something that it's a shared pain for security teams as well, because when we speak with security executives and their teams, they are swiveling between multiple tools on the environment as well. As a matter of fact, we're working now on a report on security platforms, precisely on that note. And one of the areas that we are tracking is AI for security, right? In the context of how do the agents that are now being deployed within Sentinel, for example, right, are helping with, okay, let's do exactly what you were describing from a low-code, no-code perspective. I know it's on the Power Platform, but we're seeing a similar thing on the security platforms as well. And there is tremendous interest in doing that, provided that, yes, we've handled the governance and risk constraints around those. So absolutely, this is a phenomenal time. The joke I make is that like, listen, you can wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, go to bed at midnight, and this stuff keeps coming at you with opportunities, right? It's information to collect, it's information to parse, and opportunities to make improvements. Perhaps you can use agents to help you with that too. As you're thinking about how you're evolving the Power Platform, and what have you been looking to improve in terms of security and governance capabilities on the platform? Where do you see the platform going in terms of one of the things that, and this is more of a higher end use case, but we do see requests for regulatory compliance.
Like, remember when the internet was new and people started creating like those blogs that talked about like what they ate for lunch or what their dog did that afternoon because they didn't know what else to do with it? I kind of feel like we're in the same place right now with AI. And so I would definitely want to preface anything I say with these are early innings. And so I kind of don't know. Okay. At the same time, as we look at, the types of regulations that are coming into play with the EU AI Act, some such examples that we're seeing there are like, hey, these particular types of data need to be handled in a particular way. And one of the things that we've started doing within Copilot Studio is surfacing those data labels, those information protection labels in the response so that folks don't inadvertently start working with sensitive data in a way that they don't intend to. And I foresee that in the fullness of time, this will continue to grow. Like, one of the things that we're seeing is we have a capability in the platform today called Advisor. An Advisor constantly scans over the agents and the apps and the automations to make recommendations in kind of like a reactive governance or reactive security perspective, because we believe strongly in the principle of trust but verify. And one of the things that we're starting to see with Advisor and the way that it can iterate through, like AI-generated app and agent descriptions, is we can actually start to flag when some of these apps or agents may be getting too close to that boundary of what, acceptable use policy within a company looks like. And so there's definitely something interesting going there.
So one of the areas that when we speak with security practitioners comes up a lot is they are balancing two very distinct problems. On one hand, they are absolutely swamped. The other is we need to balance two things. On one hand, we want to use as much as possible of the broader tooling we already have, the security platform conversation that we are observing, right? That being said, there's still in many cases, particularly the more novel use cases, there is a need to work with third parties. What's been your experience navigating this platform and ecosystem scenario in the conversations you've had as people have been using your platform?
Yeah, I think that what we try to do is we try to start from, first and foremost, providing those foundational security primitives that people need to be able to leverage these capabilities safely. And that has to be native within the platform, right? Like if I have to go find an authentication provider or find an authorization service or figure out my auditing and, those sorts of scenarios, like that's a non-starter, right? And so we have to provide those capabilities from the get-go across Power Platform and Copilot Studio. I think the next layer above that is if I think about the tools that someone in the CISO's organization is using on a daily basis, I'd love to think that they come to the Power Platform Admin Center every day, but I know that's not true. Right? They're spending their time in, Defender experiences. They're spending their time in Sentinel experiences. And so it's critically important that all of the telemetry, all of the audit logs, and these sorts of things naturally flow into those systems because we have to meet those security professionals where they are. And then I think the final thing that we're seeing is there are some unique and novel risks in some cases with AI, right? When we look at things like prompt injection and, kind of the emerging product categories of like XDR for AI, does Microsoft have some solutions in that space with Defender? Yes. Is it also such a quickly evolving product category that we need to plug into the broader ecosystem? Yes. And so, the same extensibility hooks that we use for integrating with Defender are actually the exact same APIs that we allow partners like Zenity to connect to so that they can provide additional defense in depth when it comes to particular risks like prompt injection.
Ryan, this was a phenomenal conversation. Thank you so much for the time.
Hey, thank you so much for your time and for all the awesome discussion. And, my hope is that folks, as they hear what we discussed today, they'll feel confident, they'll feel empowered that they have the capabilities needed to manage that security, governance, operational availability risk, and that they'll be able to parlay that into, accelerating how AI is able to transform their business and deliver outcomes for their employees as well as their customers. Can't wait to see what's next.
I think that as I ponder on what we discussed, a few things. First and foremost, this notion that you have been building a platform to begin with in terms of low code, no code before, and then building the AI capabilities on top of that does give people the benefit of building on what they've already done. It does give the benefit of tying to the rest of their ecosystem, and it's as much about the culture of let's try and get started and work on different types of use cases without trying to boil the ocean. We're going to build a capability that accommodates different use cases, different levels of governance requirements, right? And then we're going to help those teams start to work on those particular scenarios. I look forward to seeing how the platform evolves and capabilities. This area never stops. One of the taglines I use is there is never a dull day in this industry, and that's the case here.
The world of AI is changing the way that we see work being done. But is it also going to change the way that we do security for all of that new AI, specifically around identity? In this episode of the Tech Field Day podcast, AI tooling is causing identity security issues. Welcome to the Tech Field Day podcast, where we bring together a group of IT technical experts to discuss a single idea about key concepts in the industry. This podcast features a variety of perspectives from the members of the Tech Field Day delegate community and is often associated with one of our events. Tech Field Day is a part of the Futurum Group, and this podcast is published on our sister company site at Techstrong TV. On this episode, which is brought to you by 1Password, we're going to be discussing AI and identity security. But before we get to that, I'd like to take a moment for our guests to introduce themselves so you know who you'll be listening to, starting with Kate.
Hi, my name is Kate Scarcella. I've been in cybersecurity for over 20 years. I presently am a chairperson for the CD Foundation Cybersecurity Special Interest Group.
And I'm Jack Pauler. I am principal analyst with Paradigm Technica, covering the intersection of AI, identity, and data security.
My name is Sanjay Ramnath. I am the Vice President of Product and Solutions Marketing here at 1Password. I've spent a little over 2 decades in cybersecurity, having run product teams. And prior to that, I cut my teeth as an engineer writing code for chip design. Super excited to be here.
All right. Thank you all for joining us. Let's jump into the premise for today's episode. No doubt that you have already started to experiment with AI. Maybe you are asking some simple questions of an LLM, or you've graduated to more complicated topics like building your own agent to do things for you. But no matter what you do, you should keep security at the front of your mind, because as we've seen in 2026, there have been a lot of challenges when it comes to security, and not just from securing things, but the way that different security paradigms integrate with each other, and quite honestly, make it difficult to know what's what. In this episode of the Tech Field Day podcast, AI tooling complicates identity security. So I want to kind of throw this out here because one of the things that we've seen as people have started adopting AI in their daily workflows, whether it's through testing or through adopting it to do their actual job, is that they sometimes forget that a lot of their AI build-outs involve the person who's doing it. If you are an individual knowledge worker with a certain security posture, that limits the blast radius in case you do something you're not supposed to. Whereas if you are a senior system administrator and you have root access over servers and the agent has your same access capabilities, it might be able to cause more problems than you might otherwise think. Why is it so complicated for us to understand how identity security translates over to this new world of AI?
Well, Tom, I'll take a stab at that. That one of the big differences up until today, up until now, everything we've done in IT has been premised on a user interacting as essentially a client-server model. A user talks to a set of computers and requests some action to be done. And that's a well understood, we had 60 years of understanding that. Started out with passwords, got figured out passwords weren't secure, went to something more secure like MFA, et cetera. But it's all premised on that one behavior. With the introduction of AI, particularly with agentic AI agents operating on your behalf, the line gets blurred both about how an activity is initiated and who is initiating that activity. And that activity is initiated by an entity on behalf of an actual user, or maybe not on behalf of an actual user, maybe on behalf of another entity. So now we have things that are happening in the background without our explicit activity initiating an action, and it becomes very hard to chase. Is the agent doing something on its own, or is it doing something on behalf of somebody else? And that agent spawns multiple agents, and it becomes very hard to chain all that activity going forward. So that part of it complicates things a lot.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Tom, I think the fundamental shift that AI and agentic AI brings to identity models is that it's not just a question of securing credentials or securing access or authenticating users anymore. It's a question of securing trust, right? The future of work is not going to be centralized. It's not going to be static. You don't provision a user an identity and then authorize them to perform a set of actions over the lifetime of a session or a workflow, and those privileges remain static, and they carry that with them. Agents operate very differently. They are non-deterministic. They don't authenticate the same way as humans do. And all of this is happening at machine scale. So really, in this new world, the question is about how do you secure trust? How do you trust what the agents do? How do you really know what agents are even running in your environment in the first place? How do you authorize them to do just what they are allowed to do, and then make sure you control those authorization permissions on a continuous basis, so you don't over provision, over privilege these agents. And then ultimately, how do you audit and observe the behavior? How do you explain the behavior? How do you create the right auditable events and so on? And this is really what causes this fundamental shift in the identity security stack or identity security models, because identity is not going to stop just at login with AI and with agents. It has to be evaluated every time access is used, and authority is exercised when the credentials are used, when secrets are used, not when the sessions are created. And you have to establish this trust when this access happens. So it's a fundamental change in how we think about the identity operating model.
I would agree with you, Sanjay, because one of the problems that we run into is people believe that if something is authorized or should be capable of performing a task, then it will always be able to perform that task and it will never change, and there'll never be anything that could potentially change the status quo, which anyone listening to this podcast is violently shaking their head right now, because we've seen that being repeated over and over again in something as simple as the NPM model, where we have, these pluggable modules and packages out there that one of them might be purchased by a third party that has ill intentions, but because we previously authorized that NPM to run on our system, oh, well, we should just trust it from here on out. In effect, the asset's identity has changed, even if the name is still the same. And that's one of the things that we have to remind everyone is, if the same NPM is requesting the same resources over and over again, there's a reason to trust it. But as soon as it starts requesting things that it hasn't normally requested before, that should be an identity change. And, think about any sci-fi movie you've ever watched. It's like, suddenly, if you start behaving weird, something's wrong, and we need to figure out why. Have you been replaced by Agent Smith or something like that?
And you're talking about moving to a behavior model as right at the end of the day. And that really becomes important, because machines are going to behave differently than humans. And especially when they start accessing, tokens and is it persistent? And so it's nice to hear that you guys are looking at the behavior.
Yeah, that's correct. I think looking at the behavior is one way of putting it, for sure. And it's not just the behavior. It's all the way from let me take a step back. The way I would characterize the operating model in the agentic world is, first you need to discover. You need to understand what exactly is happening on your network, in your environment, especially at the edge of the business, because the agentic adoption will start at the endpoint. It will start with your developers adopting co-pilots to write code. And the first step is even knowing, okay, these are the agents that are actually running in my environment, and then making sure that visibility can be translated to the right guardrails and the right governance, knowing what credentials those agents are using, knowing what permissions they're being provisioned with to operate, and the workflows they're integrated into. So that's the second step, is how do you secure the agents once you've discovered them and give them the right guardrails and the right permissions and broker the right set of credentials in a scoped manner, right? So they are again not going rogue and doing things they're not supposed to do, or carrying forward permissions and privileges that they're not supposed to have after the task is completed. And then the third step is really being able to audit and being able to track behavior and being able to observe on a continuous basis, knowing what the agents are doing and being able to correct the governance posture policies based on the visibility and observability. So it's almost like a continuum of sorts. And you're right, behavior is at the core of the continuum.
So something you said that you and Tom said sort of lead me around the concept of trust. And you brought up trust early on, Sanjay. And I think one of the things we're sort of dancing around is this concept of we used to understand the behavior of an application. Tom's example was NPMs, right? A module that you've installed, or you've installed just a simple application that's going to make database queries. We understand it. It's well scoped, well understood. So when you install that application, you can go ahead and look at it and say, I understand it. I can put guardrails around it. And if it steps outside the guardrails, I can then say something's wrong, right? The science fiction character has gone crazy, hasn't been replaced. But agentic AI behaves differently in that it doesn't have a well understood behavior profile because it's not limited in scope or actions, and it is non-deterministic. So it's very hard early on to put those types of guardrails on. So we want to change that concept of putting guardrails around it, and also, you talked a little bit about understanding visibility of what things are happening out there. The world is now moving so fast, and agents spawning other agents and creating their own task profiles, that we can't keep up with it. We can't have foreknowledge and whitelist, blacklist type environments to look at what agents are doing. So I think what we're saying is, instead of trying to identify the agents, try to identify the users and the agents having an identity and being another form of a user, and authorizing them for specific actions with limited scope at limited points in time, which is really sort of bringing that whole concept of zero trust in to apply that everywhere, starting with identities. And whether it's AIs and agents or other applications, we really have to get back to this concept of, we have an entity that's trying to access data and take action based on that data. And should it be allowed to do that or not, regardless of what type of application it is? It's really, is it authorized at this particular moment in time to do this activity?
Yeah, that's correct. I think the one maybe nuance I would add to that is the non-determinism or the non-probabilistic nature of agents is also a superpower in a way, right? Because that's what you want agents to do. You want them to be adaptable. You want them to perform tasks based on environments and conditions that they can learn from. And from a security standpoint, from at least a one password ethos is really to help our customers safely embrace the future, without looking at this more as hey, it's a threat, or it's not a doom and gloom scenario. I think AI can be powerful if harnessed properly. So really, the question is, how do security models evolve? How does the technology stack evolve so we can adapt the models, adapt the technology, adapt the way we configure policies and roles and provision identities and track behavior and things like that to this new world where you have agents operating on behalf of humans at machine scale and operating in that more adaptive environment. So it's really about empowering the business to harness the power in a safe and secure manner, as opposed to managing the fear that, hey, you have rogue agents and swarms of agents that are just going to go wild and do things they're not supposed to do. I think it's an important distinction. It's a nuanced distinction, but the conversation should be one of enablement rather than one of fear.
And I think it's important that you bring up this whole enablement versus fear discussion, because one of the problems that tends to grow out of this particular dichotomy is what happens when users meet friction in the real world. Because time and time again, we have seen users will tend to avoid the friction. Instead of trying to fix the problem, saying, oh, well, the reason why my efforts to do this aren't as good as anybody else's is because, there's all these extra security controls in place, or you've mandated that we're going to use this particular AI platform instead of that one, but I really prefer the one that's installed on my laptop. You don't typically hear, let's try to resolve this security policy so that won't be a problem. Instead, what you usually see is, oh, well, I just did what I wanted to do anyway. and I went around it. And we've seen that happen quite a bit recently, where people are like, oh, well, I'm just going to download this program and it's not corporate approved, but that's okay. I'm just going to test it out. And then a couple of days later, what you find out is that, oh, well, now it's going out and it's requesting information on my behalf and doing all of these things. And the people that work in the corporate risk department are like, well, we shouldn't be doing this. This wasn't on the approved list. How can organizations work together with their users to allow them to work at the speed they want to, while also continuing to protect the things that they know really shouldn't be uploaded to the public internet or introduced into these models that could potentially cause exposure later?
Yeah, the term that comes to mind, Tom, and we use it a lot, and it's part of our DNA, is that security should be about making the easy thing the secure thing, right? So if you make the easy way of doing things also the secure way of doing things, then naturally you have a alignment across the security requirements and the business requirements, and it's not easy. It's I recognize as a security vendor that we always run into this friction where security teams want to by in it's the right thing to do. You have to be paranoid if you're in security, because there is a lot of bad stuff out there. But what that ends up translating to is a set of rules and policies and a model really that starts constraining business velocity. And when security starts constraining business velocity, the business almost always wins. Developers need to write and ship code faster, and you need to operate the business faster, especially in this world where SaaS is the norm. Browsers are the front door of work. People are allowed to use their own devices on enterprise networks. So you need speed, and you need to kind of maintain that competitive edge. So the challenge that security practitioners have is, how do we make sure that we do this in a secure way? How do we empower the business to move with velocity? How do we empower developers to move with velocity? How do we empower users to find and adopt the tools they need to operate and do their best creative, innovative work, but make sure there's the right set of guardrails around it? So, moving security closer to the business, closer to the edge where work really happens. And this is massively amplified by AI, as you can imagine. AI is all about empowering users to create this parallel workforce of sorts that massively accelerates their ability to do productive work. So now, really, the question for security is, how do you build the right framework to empower and enable the business to move with that velocity? We call this business-led IT, and that's going to really come from moving the controls and the discovery and the auditability to the point where work really happens. The old model where everything was centralized, where your identity registries were centralized, your policies were centralized, your authentication systems happened in one place, and the users were only allowed to do what the centralized system allowed them to do, is gone. That's not going to survive. It's already broken with SaaS, and with AI, it's going to be obliterated to the point where you have to move the identity model, the security model, to a place where the users are empowered to do their best work, and your CIO and CISO is empowered to say yes rather than say no. That's the model of the future.
So you're talking about velocity and speed and everything else in order to not basically be the no, right? We don't want cybersecurity to always be the no. So how are you going to, for CI, CD, and automation pipelines, which is something that I deal with, how do you prevent AI-assisted pipelines from becoming these secret brokers?
Yeah. So one of the use cases that we've been helping customers with is managing developer secrets and environment files and artifacts of that nature, and enabling them to utilize those credentials and secrets in a secure manner. So an example is, today we have developers that use our enterprise vault to store SSH keys, store API keys, store secrets and tokens and environment files in a way that makes it super easy to integrate into their CI/CD pipelines, into their IDE environments. We're also integrated into AI development environments now, like Cursor and so on. So that's an example where using our vaulting capability and then having the guardrails that are built around our ability to provision those credentials and also govern how those credentials are used in development pipelines, we're able to enable developers to continue building with velocity, continue adopting the tools they need at the endpoints to build with velocity. At the same time, provision secrets and keys and tokens and environment files, and also share those types of artifacts in a very secure manner. Does it answer the question, Kate?
Well, I think my one question though is, doesn't that, then aren't we then talking about static, and then doesn't static, then how do you cut off the access? Like, the whole thing with AI and security for agents, isn't it important to only have like a time of use moving
Yes.
forward?
Exactly. So that's really where the policy framework around all of this will evolve, and that's some of the ideas we're working on right now is around how do you provide scoped access to those credentials, and the scope could have multiple dimensions. It could be time-based, it could be role-based, it could be based on the resources they're trying to access, it could be based on the environment it's working on. So it's really a multidimensional problem when it comes to scoping credentials access, and you're absolutely right. That's going to be a critical aspect of how we provision AI agents or agentic development, and not just development, even agents that are operating outside of developer environments. How do you provide them the right information and the credentials they need and the secrets they need in that scope manner?
And I think if I remember correctly, 1Password, you have a pretty nice user interface when it comes to governance, right? And will that basically translate to AI agents? I mean, I'm not saying it's easy for you guys, but is that going to be something that you look at within the interface that you can easily identify the AI agents and the whole scope of work so that things are done within a single pane of glass?
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. I think if you step back in time and look at 1Password's history, um, we built tools for users, and they were secure tools, but ultimately it was all about making things easy for users to secure their digital identities and their digital lives, and uh, that thread will carry through everything that we build. As we build tools for the enterprise, as we get into agentic AI, um, that's a North Star that we hold ourselves to, is let's make sure that this is super easy, not just for the administrators, not just from a control and a policy standpoint, but it should be super easy for ultimately for the users to embrace it. Now, an example there is, one of the capabilities we have in our identity stack is the ability to add device context as a dimension of trust, right? So when there's an access request, making sure that we govern that request not just based on identity or the resource being requested, but also make sure the device from where the request is made is compliant. And when you find non-compliance, you want to make it easy for the user to remediate that. So we provide guidance. We provide quick way for the user to self-correct that and get back on track without having to file an IT ticket and without having to wait for a few days for somebody to respond to it. They just fix the problem and they move on. So those are the kind of things that we would want to carry on through the agentic AI workflows, through developer workflows, is to make it super easy, not just to identify where the security gaps exist, but also make sure that we provide enough information and context to the users themselves so they can remediate and correct, at the same time providing the administrators with the visibility they need to apply those guardrails and tune the policy. So that balancing act is going to be really important.
So Sanjay, one of the things that you brought up a little bit earlier in the conversation was the world of centralized identity store is basically over. And it's funny because, 2, 3, 4 years ago when I was talking about this, we would always talk about how we had many silos of identity, and that was a challenge. And the centralized tools were the solution to that challenge, right? Bring everything under one roof, and then you can control it better. And I think what you're saying, which I agree with, is that the modern way of working, particularly with AI and agentic AI, is and with developers, what Kate's talking about with the CI/CD stack and needing to have access to so many different things simultaneously, programmatic access, is you need to be able to have and work with silos of identity. And so you need to enable that type of framework instead of saying it doesn't work, bring everything under a central roof. When you have, anywhere from 40 times to 1,000 times more non-human identities as human identities, and we probably get even more than that now, it becomes untenable to try to have a central repository of all those identities, as well as the associated secrets and API secrets and stuff like that. It's just not manageable in that fashion. So I think I'm very enamored with the 1Password approach, was just saying, how do we enable silos of identity, and how do we control access while still having silos of identity, and enable that to become an enabler of the business rather than a blocker of the business?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a place for the centralized control plane, if you will, right? There are things that make sense to centralize. For example, I think visibility is something that belongs in that centralized control plane. Auditability is something that belongs in that centralized control plane. But then when you think about um, authorization and authentication and enforcement of policies and governance, those are some of the aspects that need to start moving out of that kind of centralized siloed approach and start moving closer and closer to where the work actually happens, where the access requests are actually made. So you can do this on a more continuous basis, as opposed to having a static set of policies that are enforced statically in a centralized manner, because that just breaks the entire model. You cannot do that in this new world where you have the actual actions are moving away from the center of the business and moving closer and closer to the users and the endpoints, and that's where work actually happens.
And then don't we actually go back to the original, these behavior indicators? I mean, isn't there definitely a difference between behavior from a machine and how you can see it and how it can act, as opposed to human?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's one of the uh, things that I believe 1Password is in a really good position to act on, because um, we have a tremendous scale and presence on endpoints today. We started our journey as a credentials vault, as a password manager, and that by definition is securing credentials for users, or users securing their own credentials at the endpoint. And now, if you translate that to what you just said, Kate, which is behavior, one of the important aspects of discovering and understanding behavior is knowing what's happening at the endpoint. You need signals. You need to know what your users are doing, what they're accessing, what credentials are being used, how they're being used, where they're being used, what they're being used for, and being able to get those signals is a very important part of building that kind of identity security continuum we talked about as we push it more and more to the edge of the business. So spot on, right? Being able to get those different signals, identity, application usage, and credential and device signals even, and then using those signals to build the identity model and applying that to the security model is going to be really important going forward. And I think we're pretty well positioned to do that.
And I totally agree with that, and I think you guys are. And don't you then start to look at time-based versus intent-based? Like, doesn't that come as a part of your conversation?
Yes, it will. I mean, I think that's going back to the question that you asked earlier about scoping and just-in-time provisioning. I think those are all components that we're going to have to start looking at as we build this model and build this framework. And it starts with getting signals. It starts with the presence at the endpoint. And then once we have that, and I believe we're kind of already there, we can build a number of different dimensions of scope and dimensions of control, if you will, around those signals. And those could be intent-based, those could be time-based, that could be environment-based, it could be based on identity. It could be based on the resource that's being accessed. All those will factor in. You're absolutely right. Intent and time would be important components of that.
So as you can tell, the new world of AI tools have shifted the way that we think about doing work. But it shouldn't just do that. It should shift the way that we think about security and the way that we look at our new digital coworkers and how they are going to be performing their roles. Because one of the things we don't want to do is let the business leave security behind in order to be more enabled, because that's how we end up having more issues to solve than we initially started with. And we need to have a good understanding of how all of those pieces come together so we can create the right policy, the right procedures, and the right protections in order to keep everyone safe and secure and doing things that they need to be doing. This episode is brought to you by 1Password, and I know that 1Password has been working very hard on solving a lot of these challenges. Sanjay, if people want to learn more about some of the solutions that you've come up with, where can they go to see that?
I would start with onepassword.com. There is a wealth of information on our website. If you're a developer, we also have a dedicated section on our website. It's onepassword.com/developers. There's a bunch of tools for developers. You can download the tools. You can try the vaulting capabilities. There's guides on integrating our tools within developer pipelines and so on. So those are the two resources I would start with. We've also published some interesting, thought-provoking blog articles around AI and the Agentic AI problem. Those would be good readings as well. So yeah, that's where I would start.
All right. Well, thank you very much to everyone for listening to this episode of the Tech Field Day podcast. If you enjoyed this discussion, please do us a favor, subscribe on YouTube or in your favorite podcast application of choice so you don't miss this episode or any of our other ones. We'd also love it if you'd leave us a rating, a review, and possibly a comment on what you thought about this episode, because those all help our show grow. This podcast was brought to you by Tech Field Day, the home of IT experts from across the enterprise, which is a part of the Futurum Group. For upcoming events, more episodes, please head over to techfieldday.com/podcast or check us out on Techstrong TV. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll hope to see you next week.
Hey everyone, welcome to our next session here at Predict 2026. What a day this has been. We started things off with Daniel Newman this morning, giving us his kind of overview. And we have really, I think this might be the first time actually, we have seen a tour de force of the Futurum analyst crew coming in here and each one of them giving us their view of what 2026 has in store in their particular areas of expertise. But as we got later in the day, I wanted to take a more strategic view of things. And so who better than the Futurum Chief Strategy Officer, Tiffani Bova. Tiffani, welcome and thanks for coming here to Predict 2026.
Oh, Alan, I'm glad that you have been so thrilled with my team. They're just the best, and I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah. As I was saying, I really am. We have really, this has been a tour de force, right? We've looked at from marketplaces to end users and the computers they're using, to security and software, AI, of course, because everything's AI. I mean, it's been a great day of learning, of predictions, of analysis. And I hope our audience has enjoyed it. I'll also remind our audience, we do have a Futurum booth set up within the virtual event experience where you can go download some of the latest research, other videos, and work product from the Futurum team. A lot of great stuff there, so go check that out, but not right now. Tiffani, I introduced you as the Chief Strategy Officer, but you also manage the Futurum research team.
I do. I'm chief strategy and research, both of them. So, it's a great position to be in because I get to have conversations with Daniel Newman, obviously, that spoke this morning, our CEO, on kind of where are we trying to take the business. But then more importantly, on the research side, how do we want to be not only a research organization, but one that is really disrupting the status quo and trying to bring differentiated value to the market in new ways. And that's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely. It is. And I get to interact from my seat here at Techstrong on it, and it is from where I sit. I was a chief strategy officer in 2005 at one of the companies I founded, Still Secure. A lot of people don't understand everything that goes into that role, right? You wear a lot of hats. You're already wearing 2 big hats, but as a CSO, you're wearing a lot of hats. Part of that, though, is being almost like an insect with your antenna up, right? Taking in external stimuli, if you will, translating that into a strategy for the corporation. Now, 2025 had to be a year of overload in terms of stimulus coming in. I can't even imagine. Explain to our audience a little bit about what 2025 was like for you. The bombardment of all of this AI, of all of the advancements, of all of the hype, and not just hype, but changes, disruptions. How does this translate, or how do you translate this into strategy?
Well, first and foremost, I joined at the end of sort of 2023. So I had a full 2024 here. And my goal ultimately was, how do I protect this amazing influence brand that Daniel had built over the years of this? It has Techstrong, it has Visible Impact, it has Signal 6.5, it has 6.5 Media, it has Futurum Research, Visible Impact. It had a lot of brands with a lot of different value propositions. And how did we pull that together in a way that clients understood the life cycle of how we can really support them in their business? All the way from labs, testing, all the way to launching a product, to helping them tell the story and give them the narratives, and also help influence externally in the marketplace. That's a very unique position to be in. Some analyst firms are very strong on insight and analysis. You have some that are very strong on media. You have some that are strong on labs and testing. You have some firms that are strong on marketing and sales enablement. But I'd be hard pressed to find anybody else that has the depth and breadth that we have across all of those categories. But it can be confusing. Sometimes you do a lot of things. What do you do? So that's really where we had to organize ourselves in a way that told a story to the market that people would go, I understand. I understand the value of each of these parts and components. And the sum of all of them is really the power of the Futurum Group. It is this multiplier of being able to help clients understand what the market is looking for, what their clients are looking for, what their competitors are doing, how we can help amplify their story. And really, ultimately, at the end of the day, our goal is to help our clients grow. At the end of the day, it's about helping our clients grow. Along the way, if they grow, we grow. And so it is the nature of the beast of, giving advice that no one listens to or writing content that no one reads. There's no value there. But if we really start to embed ourselves in that process for them during their strategic cycle, then we have really accomplished what we set out to accomplish.
Absolutely. Tiffani, both you and I have been in the tech space probably longer than we want to admit. Have you ever seen a year like this? Have we ever sat at a moment in time as we look ahead now into 2026 that, there's so much promise. There's so much to be excited about, but you have to be tempered about it too, right? And that's part of that chief strategy officer role, right? To kind of separate the hype from the reality, the what's doable versus I can't just be, chasing our tails here. From your seat, how do you distinguish? How do you say, hey, this is real. This is maybe not so real right now?
Yeah. So I've been in tech now 30 years. So it has been a minute. But this is my third where I feel like every conversation is about this. So I remember a time, which I'm sure you will as well, where every conversation was about Y2K. Like every conversation was about Y2K.
Yes.
That was sort of my indoctrination into a big technological shift in conversation. I was very early in my career. I was very early. And so, I was selling technology at that time. So it was a boom for us, right? Because Y2K was with fear and with a challenge is a lot of opportunity to sell a lot of stuff.
A lot of fun.
Yep. So, well, there was a mix of both, and and ultimately, I would say during that Y2K time, I sold one of the very first deployments of electronic medical records to Loma Linda University, and so I remember that conversation of like digitizing, medical records. They all looked at us like, "What are you talking about?" Right? But we had been focused on the legal market, and we knew it was fairly similar. Massive amounts of documentation needs to be secure. How do we scan it all? Then how do we search it all? Then how do we categorize it all? And this is very, very long before all the stuff we have now. We were just kind of right out of DOS-based systems. Like, it was a long time ago. But the first one for me was Y2K. The second sort of wave I was on was the internet, right? This thing called the World Wide Web. And I ran sales, marketing, and customer service for the US's largest web hosting company back in 2000 to 2004. And I remember sitting in front of clients and saying, you're not going to don't go have lunch with your server. Like put it on, our equipment. And that was kind of infrastructure as a service, which it is now. Back then it was an ASP provider, right? An application service provider.
I had no idea. What company was this?
It was Interland. So we were about 4 times the size of Rackspace at the time. We almost bought Rackspace actually.
And I was Interliant.
Well, close.
We were in ASP too. We were doing Lotus. Please, I'll talk to you offline about it.
Yeah,
but yes, I remember those days well.
So crazy. And,
no cloud.
No. And I was the beta client for Constant Contact, and I was the beta client for Eloqua. We were pushing the envelope on e-commerce, and we were selling domain names. A lot of that business got spun out to GoDaddy and then became web.com. And now it's kind of gone on to become other things. But, during that time, it was, we had built a $115 million ARR business, in a very quick amount of time. And we were doing private label hosting for Verizon. And I mean, it was a wild time. And I would say that was sort of the second period where I was like, wow, okay, Y2K. Wow, I thought that was crazy. This World Wide Web stuff is nuts. Getting executives at traditional technology companies to really think differently about how they sell and deploy technology. And Salesforce at the time was like a year old. Like 98, 99. So we are really talking early as, SaaS. We're talking very early in infrastructure as a service. Those terms weren't available. Not everyone had, high bandwidth in their homes. We were carrying BlackBerries. It was very different. Now here we are on the third one for me, right? Which is AI, where every conversation is AI. But this has a very different feel. I feel like this is like Angry Birds meets AI, because the adoption of Angry Birds in a consumer product, right, was faster than telephone and electricity and automobiles and all the things during the Industrial Revolution, right? But the consumer embraced it first. Well, you could argue GPT did the same thing, right? That everyone started playing with ChatGPT in a way in their personal consumer lives. And then businesses are like, hold on, how do I take advantage of this in the B2B world, right? And similar with applications where many, millennials were using technology very different than Gen X's. We were digital immigrants, not digital natives. And so you now have digital natives with ChatGPT where they're just like, look, I can do things so quickly in my personal life. I can plan travel and I can get answers to questions. What does that mean to businesses? And so now I see this huge transition of, remember when the web came out and people are like, look, you have to put your information out on the web like a digital brochure. So if someone's looking for your business, they can find you, right? A digital yellow pages. Some of you don't even know what that is, but a digital yellow pages.
I know what you mean.
And that's what you need. Well, now AI is the same way that customers, I used to work for another firm many years ago in the analyst world. And back when I was there, we were the ones that first started saying like the buyer journey was collapsing because people were going to the web to do their research before they ever reached out to sales. And so you could argue 65 or 70% of research was happening before they ever reached out to sales. Well, now it's happening with AI and GPT, where customers are going out there and going, we're the top best 3 security products for a mid-sized bank, and then it gives you an answer. And then it goes, well, okay, how would I compare against what's the cost model? Like, give me ROI analysis. Like, let me hear what clients are saying or customers are saying, or what about this and this? And they're asking all these questions, getting all these details. Now, I'm not saying it's 100% accurate, not what I'm saying, but I'm saying they've changed where they're doing their research. Now, when they call a potential vendor or, a technology company, they are so much further down their understanding from a competitive standpoint than just knowing your name, which might have been what it was in the early days of web, like web 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. Now we're definitely 4.0 at this point, and you could argue industrial. Are we at the 4th industrial revolution, 4.5? Are we at 5.0 now? I don't know, but I would say that is really a change for providers. And we leaned into that here at Futurum by launching something called Futurum Signal to capitalize on the fact that now clients are looking for new ways to assess and understand different technologies in a more expedited way using AI.
Absolutely. Daniel and I spoke a little bit about Signal this morning, and I think to your point, Tiffani, not only has sort of that buying process drastically changed because they're self-educating, whether it's a consumer as an individual or a corporate consumer, they're much more informed by the time they reach you. But also that has crunched the buying cycle from a time where a product like Signal, they can't afford to read what the analysts thought 6 months ago, 9 months ago, or last year. Stuff's happening too quickly.
Right.
We're living in, we were talking about going live on video, you and I, before we started this session. We're living in a live world where people need up to the moment kind of information. So telling me in 2026 what 2025 information you had is nice, but it's not what I'm looking for.
Yeah, and I think it moves to, you almost could say, look, it used to be a reactive model. I'm a client. I'm a prospective buyer of technology, and I'm looking for a solution. I'm going to call 3 people. I'm going to leave them a message, and then they'll call me back, right? Very reactive. And then maybe it became a little more proactive, where salespeople would in an unsolicited manner, right, cold call businesses and say, I think we can really help you with what you're trying to accomplish. They read an article in a newspaper or a magazine, they find the company, they look them up, they buy a list, they do something, and they outbound call, right? So that was being more proactive. And then we moved technically to being more predictive. Okay, companies who look like this and buy this are more likely to then buy that. Or this is going to be the pace in their adoption cycle. Or, they're going to grow at this rate because we've seen 100 companies of similar size or ilk do something very similar. So we can see through that analysis that we think they're more likely to want this or want that. And so that was technology really starting to help be more predictive. Now we're in this AI world where the system is able to do everything I just described very, very quickly. But I'm always a fan of human in the loop either at the end or the beginning, right? In the context prompting and what the AI is actually doing for you and the rules associated with that. And then a human at the loop at the end. So I've talked to a lot of companies now that are saying, look, we're actually hiring in the sales organization at our big technology firm, like a sales AI expert, that all they're doing is working those models and those systems and those prompts, and really making sure that when they're reaching out in this selling motion, that they're doing so in a way that isn't AI slop, right? It's just bad data, or it's too much, it's spam, right? It's too much communication, or it's not even relevant. And so while you may go, look, we went from touching 100 customers to touching 1,000, let's give a small golf clap but those other 900 are really bad. And they've done worse for your brand than if you just stuck with the 100. So, I'm a fan of technology, but I'm a fan of human and tech, not human alone, not tech alone. I mean, I think there are things tech can do alone, and I think there are things humans can do alone, obviously. But in the mean, the maximum performance enhancement happens when those two things work in harmony. And then the 1 + 1 is absolutely not even 3. The 1 + 1 is like 10 or 10x what it used to be. And I think that while promising and exciting, and everyone talks about the promise of that, very few have been able to capitalize on that yet.
Yeah. And I think, when we look back at 2025, I think that right there might be the big answer, right? Very few have been able to capitalize on it yet. But I guess that begs the question, is 2026 the year that more capitalize on it? Or are we talking further out, 27, 28, beyond that?
Yeah, I wonder if we're about to go down the trough of disillusionment, right? Because AI has been on a massive hype, right? I mean, it's been rocketing
up. And who
up.
could live up to it?
Yeah, and not only that, it's look, companies used to do transformation efforts, technically based transformation efforts. Let's say 2 to 3 a year. Like, we're going to modernize our ERP. We're going to update our CRM. We're going to, change our security protocols. We're going to, go to all web-based tools and not, ship, 100 CDs or whatever it might be. And those 2 to 3 transformations a year for an organization has now become like 10 or 12. And so the problem with that volume of transformation is humans cannot absorb all that transformation. So as a CTO or CIO, if you're listening to this, or a CEO and you're listening to this and you're like, we're going to do these 10 things this year in 2026, I want you to always remember on the other side of all that change are humans. And not all humans will get every change motion. Like your finance and billing team might get a change that doesn't touch anybody else, or your sales team might get a change that doesn't touch anybody else. But if you're going to change tools that the company is using, across the board, and you're doing 6 to 8 big transformation changes or digitization over 2026, you will burn your people out. And what will happen is they just won't adopt it. So you've spent all this money on this technology, you've rolled it out, you've told your board, you've told your team, like the promise of the ROI of this, of how much better it's going to make your life. And then it's like, wah, wah, nothing happened, or it missed the expectations. Was it a technology miss or was it a people miss? And executives usually point to people saying, they're not adopting it or they're not doing what we want. And no one's actually saying, well, why not? Were they not trained? Is this the 5th thing we've changed in the last 90 days? A human can change behavior in 66 days on average. So if you change 10 things in a year times 66 days, it's 660 days. It's too many days.
360 days. Yeah.
Right? Now, you might double up and go, well, we're changing 3 things at a time. Well, so I'm going to change my diet, start working out, and, move to a new city.
Sounds like my New Year's resolutions.
Right. You're not going to do it. It don't work, right? So I always want, while the shiny things are exciting, while all of it is really important and can have impact, the smaller your organization is, the harder it is to absorb that much change simultaneously. The larger your organization is, it's easier to absorb that much change, but it's harder to get consistency because of the volume and the number of people. Now, in my prior life to Futurum, I worked 8 years at Salesforce, which, everybody knows who they are, knows our CEO. And he could change something on the dime because the operating philosophy and culture of the organization was such that when he made a change in a 30-day period, 60,000 employees would absolutely turn left or turn right because of the operating model. But not everybody is like that. Most people, we're on a 3-year transformation path. We're on a 2-year transformation path. We've just launched a new strategy. We've told the board it's going to be 3 years, right? Any of those things, my boss, right? Our CEO, there is no strategy transformation that has a 3 in front of it or a 2 in front of it or a 1 in front of it, right? It's in a quarter or 2. And so moving that fast requires the right organizational structure and infrastructure to handle that kind of demand.
So people are saying, she's right. How do I get that? And so how do you instill that sort of organizational structure to play at the speed of business today? Because that's really what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, the Achilles heel for all of this is process. Processes are the Achilles heel of any organization. If there's too many manual touches, you can't scale. If the processes are broken, you can't scale. I'll get really basic here for a second. If your technology solutions don't talk to each other, you can't maximize AI because the data isn't consistent and the data is not valid. AI is all about data. If you don't have good data and data in one place and data it can trust and it can rely on, it's going to give you bad data in, bad insights out. So if your technology doesn't talk to each other, that's another area for improvement. But I would say processes would be the first place I'd start. Now, it's not sexy. It isn't like someone grows up and says, if you remember that commercial where like, when I grow up, I want to be a middle manager. It's like, when I grow up, I want to be responsible for process and change management. But it is the most critical because if you can't fix a process and change a process quickly, everyone is operating in this bimodal way, right? We're operating the old way while simultaneously being forced to work the new way. And it's very difficult to do both. So I'll give you one little stat. So switching tabs. So I always ask this question. If you're watching this right now, I want you to look up at the tabs of all the tabs you have open on your desktop. And I doubt you have one tab open. I doubt it's okay. And some people will have like 100 tabs open. Over the course of a day, switching between tabs is like a 0.02 millisecond. It's like an instant. Your eyes will see the change, but your brain doesn't catch up. Over the course of a year, just context switching between tabs. So between your sales tool and your marketing tool and your service tool or your Slack and your Zoom and your Teams and your whatever it is, like, right? Switching between all those is 5 weeks of switching time. 5 weeks. 5 weeks you waste on just going tab to tab to tab. So when someone says to you,
almost 10% of the year.
You need to increase productivity of your team. I'm always like, okay, I'm just going to start at the lowest hanging fruit. How many systems do they need to log into? How many, where's the data sitting? And if I can cut that down to 50%, I can give back 2.5 weeks of time. And if I did that 3 or 4 times, so I'm getting really tactical here. Like, obviously, I'm not talking at 40,000 feet, but you asked how. Sometimes it's really the basics, and people get caught up in the big aircraft carrier of change that has to happen, and it's overwhelming, it's intimidating, versus thinking about the small little changes you can make every day over the course of 2026. And by the time you get on the backside of this year, the company will look markedly different than it does today. And I think that's where technology has an opportunity to accelerate that, but you can't do it if you're not paying attention to the foundation of the business.
Tiffani, I want to bring up an example where the rubber meets the road here.
All right.
You call it the FIP. I'm slow. I say Futurum Intelligence Platform.
That's what it's called. That's what it's called.
Yep. A great example of everything you just spoke about in many ways, right? We're gathering meaningful data. We're putting it all, we're utilizing, technology, and AI and everything else. You were a real guiding light in helping to kind of craft a strategy around this. If you can, and we can't give out secrets, obviously, but hey, the FIP's open for anyone who wants me to go check it out. You can go to futurumgroup.com and, take a peek at it. But Tiffani, how does that, right? That's where strategy meets reality, right? Into a real product. How does that enable Futurum?
Well, I'll just use the example I was just talking about. Look,
that's what made me think of it.
Yeah, the promise of the Futurum Intelligence Platform, I'm just going to talk internally here for a second, right, is it allows me to have agentic analysts working alongside my human analysts. So if I have a practice leader in, enterprise software as an example, I want him to have 5 principal analysts, in parentheses, AI agents, working for him. Working for him. So he's directing the prompts and writing the prompts and all of that. And the power of me saying, do I need 5 more humans, or can I have 1 human and 5 agents? And then, we start to test and learn, and it's looking for signals and it's writing content. Obviously, human is in the loop. doing all of this. And then I go, now I need to add another human. But I've got all this capability through the agents. Now, in theory, on a piece of paper in a PowerPoint slide, everyone's like, yes, like, how do we get 10 principal analysts, AI agents? How do we create, will our org charts of the future actually have agents on the org chart? And you're hiring and firing agents. This agent no longer is necessary. We get rid of this agent. We need another agent that does these things, or this agent is getting smarter and smarter. And now it's becoming more and more capable. Do we track that performance improvement and that agent starts to take on more and more responsibility? Like, I know that might sound crazy, but possible, right? Now, while it sounds good on a slide, do humans just go, I'm in? No. Well, wait a minute.
That's the problem.
Wait a minute. My name's on this research. I want to make sure it meets my standards. It's my brand. It's my reputation, and all warranted comments. They are absolutely warranted comments. So this is a behavior change. I'm not saying tomorrow you're going to have 5 agents working for you and they'll be cranking out 100 research pieces and it's going to be perfect and the world is butterflies and unicorns and rainbows. We know that that's not true. So I have to crawl, but I need everyone to crawl with me. And it's been interesting, right? People will crawl at different speeds and be interested in doing things. How do they take their own way of working and apply it to how we're trying to do things now? It's not easy. It is definitely a lot of people management and process management and behavior change. On the other side of this, when do I think we're going to get there? I hope we get there soon, right? And I'd say Daniel would hope we get there sooner than I hope. But ultimately, I underestimated what I needed to do on the people side versus how heavy and hard the lift was going to be on the technology side, right? Because we have a killer team on the tech side, and it's my responsibility to get the people aligned to what our technology can do. And even in the last 60 or 90 days, and really since Signal launched, we've come miles from where, if we're on a football field, right? We were on the other end zone and we're going to the end zone, right? We were like probably on the 15-yard line, and Signal got us to about midfield, where everyone now understands and starting to adopt and is using it in new and unique ways. So now how do I capture that and repeat it across the team? And with every day, we're just making plays and getting a little yardage, and we get sacked. We move back a little bit and we go forward. And for those of you out of the US, think your football. Same thing, right? You don't always pass forward. Sometimes you got to pass backwards. And so, ultimately at the end of the day, it's been inspiring and exciting to get back into the analyst world in an environment like this where it isn't just the same old thing. And I think we've got the right team to do it.
Absolutely. Tiffani, we've got 5 minutes left.
All righty.
For our folks out there, look, as I said, they can go sign into Futurum and see what we've built and see for themselves. But not everyone out there is going to have the capability of building their own platform, of their own kind of base. But we're coming to a point where you don't have to just rely on the large frontier LLM model.
Yep.
Everyone should have the ability to, they say 95% of the data on the internet's behind the firewall and hasn't been incorporated into
Correct.
the models anyway. Everyone hopefully should get the opportunity or the ability to use their own data to make their AI ventures smarter, better, faster, more effective, more ROI. What's your advice to these companies? How do they harness this power that at Futurum we've been able to harness it? How do other folks get to harness it? Short of, they could sign up for subscription, but we do sell them. But beyond that, what else would you advise them?
Well, the first thing I'd say is I would get an understanding of what people are doing now in your own organization, what tools they're using, and how they're using them. First stop is to make sure that you've got strong governance around what your companies are doing today. You definitely do not want your employees uploading proprietary information or NDA information or company specific information up to the public, ChatGPT or Perplexity or Gemini or something else, right? So at a minimum, you need to understand what's happening in your own organization today and make a decision on what is your strategy around using AI, in what roles, maybe you never want legal and finance using it, but customer service should be using it all day. Okay, then come up with rules for that, or sales or something like that. So I'd understand what you're currently doing and using. It's kind of like shadow IT. Back in the day when, we were selling things and we would avoid selling to a CIO and we'd go sell to a business unit leader, we could sell faster than trying to go to the CIO, and it was called shadow IT. It's almost like shadow AI, where everyone's using their own preferred tool and they could be uploading things because there's no governance, there's no rules, there's no checks. And so that is really dangerous, especially if you're in a highly regulated industry. It is even more of a no-no, right? So I'd say start there. Secondarily, then come up with what is going to be your preferred LLM and your preferred model, and then who gets to use it and how they get to use it. And then, you work with your IT team, your CIO on where is your data? Do you want to, use that data as part of your own? I mean, you can create your own sound. I have my own Tiffani Bova AI, and it's only my content. So it's my books and my podcasts and my keynotes and everything I've ever written, everything I've ever done. So I can ask it, like, write me something, 50 words about this topic. It's going to write it in my voice. It's going to use my examples. It's going to use my things, but it's only me. Now, if I want to do it and I want it to go to the web and look for other things, then I do it a different way, because I never sort of commingle the two, because I want to keep that proprietary to me. And it's like Anthropic ingested my books, and so I'm part of the lawsuit. Like, you don't just get to ingest my stuff, right? And so you don't want that to happen either. So I would say really understanding the governance and rules around what tools you're using, how you're using them, how and where your data is showing up, is absolutely priority number one, because it's already happening. And if you don't know what's happening, that's even worse. And I'd be surprised if many people weren't sort of aware that it was happening and trying to get their arms around it. I think that they may be like, how do we put the cat back in the bag, right? Because it's out and running around.
Never goes in the bag.
Yeah. And so I don't envy anybody who's in that situation, but I think at the end of the day, or even hire, outside help to help you get your arms around this. But it's going to be one of those things that if you don't get your arms around it, you don't get a handle on it, it becomes very dangerous, especially if your information on your company is, proprietary and you don't want it out there on the web.
Is this a 2026 thing, Tiffani? Can we do this in this year coming up?
Absolutely. I definitely see it. What's interesting is very small businesses are able to do it because they can move faster and they don't have as much stuff they have to fix. And, they can be very quick on governance. Futurum's a great example of that. When you're up at the upper end of the enterprise, they can put a lot of money and energy and resources to it. It's kind of in that middle set where a good mid-sized business, call it, 100 million to $1 billion, you've got a lot of employees, you've got a lot of processes, you've got a lot of shadow IT, you've got a lot of things happening. Like, that's an investment you're going to have to make. And if you're not public and you're private, you can do that kind of investment without the eyes of the street on you. It's different if you're public, but if you're private, I definitely think so, because I see it happening all the time. I hear people saying they're getting much smarter on selling and marketing and customer service and using AI, making decisions at the executive level. They have they have AI board members. They have AI on their org charts. Like, while it sounds, very out there, I do hear it. It is on the edge. It is not the norm. It is on the edge. But it is happening. I do believe 2026 will continue to gain momentum, and we'll start to see more use cases, and we'll see real true ROI on it. Forget the big hyperscalers and the neo clouds. Like, forget that sort of 7 trillion that's moving around those guys. But just for businesses in that mid-market space, I think that's this year is going to be the year we start to see them really make inroads.
If I had to boil down your 2026 outlook, you're extremely bullish on AI.
I'm bullish.
But keep humans in the loop.
I am bullish on both of those things. Yes.
Absolutely. Tiffani Bova, Chief Strategy Officer here on Predict 2026. Hey, we've still got more, including the DevOps Dozen Award winners. So stay tuned. Go check out the Futurum booth and our virtual event here. And you can download more of Tiffany's writings and the whole team's writings and videos there. You're watching Predict 2026.